My name is Mackenzie Richardson, and I am a UCDC peer coordinator. So I work as a former student and a former alumni from the UCDC program for you guys here at UCSD. And I did the UCDC program back in 2019 in the winter during the government shutdown. And I worked at the Woodrow Wilson Center, which was or is a foreign policy think tank where I was a media intern. And currently I am a graduate student at UCSD. So still here, still working for the program, love my job and love letting you all know how you can have a similar experience. But today, specifically, we want to give you all resources for actually financing a quarter in DC. So I myself, when I did the UCDC program, had to take out student loans, had to save up working as a barista on campus to go do this program. And so while I've worked at UCDC, I've really wanted to put on a workshop like this to help all of you get access to some of the resources that I didn't know were out there when I did the program. And so one of the best resources we have with us today is a real human and graduate from the UCDC program over at Berkeley, Melissa Dargan, who is fabulously accomplished and has taken it upon herself during the pandemic to actually put together a variety of resources for students who are interested in interning at DC. And so Melissa graduated from Berkeley in 2011 and has a robust career since her graduation. So I really recommend for all the students who are here synchronously with us today to think of some questions to ask her, because she is an awesome resource. So what we're going to be covering today are these items. So first, we're going to go over the actual costs of attending a quarter in DC with the UCDC program specifically. And then I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to actually share some of those resources with us. So we're going to go over paid versus unpaid internships, some of the scholarships that are available to students who want to intern in DC, more financial resources, including some that Melissa has created herself. And then, of course, at the end, an opportunity to ask Melissa and myself any further questions. So just to get us going, first, the costs. So this is taken directly from the UCDC at UCSD website. And so the average cost for the past 2 years of attending an academic quarter, so that would be the fall, winter, spring quarters in DC, is about $12,050. And so this breakdown comes from mostly the UCSD registration fees, which are the same at UCSD and in the UCDC program. They don't change, they're not different, but what does change is an increased cost of living. And so that's actually living in the UCDC center, that's your housing cost. So for an 11-week quarter, that's going to be about $3,719, and this is subject to change for the future. So we're taping this right now in winter quarter of 2021. So if you are watching from the future, this might be a little bit different, and I recommend you go to the website to find an updated budget. And then going after the fixed fees, as you can see on the left, are going to be more of the flexible costs, and it'll really be up to each student to determine how much those costs are going to be. So some of those are going to be your airplane ticket, which students are required to buy themselves. So that could be anywhere from $300 to $700. The Metro is kind of a cost that varies. So far, starting with actually my cohort back in 2019, UCDC's actually been paying for students' Metro tickets to have an unlimited Metro pass while they're in the UCDC program, which cuts down on transportation costs enormously. But I don't have knowledge on how long that program will go on for, especially as the program comes back after the pandemic. So after transportation are living expenses. So something to note is that in DC, the cost of food, whether at a restaurant or groceries, is higher than San Diego and other parts of the country. And additionally, you are going to be taking at least one class, a seminar, if you are attending UCDC during the academic quarter. So you might have to buy textbooks for that. So that's how we get this general number of $12,050, which is what you want to budget for if you do not have financial aid. And so again, this is just a recap slide of where all these costs are coming from. I really implore everyone to remember that you are purchasing your own airline ticket, and it is very beneficial to purchase that sooner rather than later. So I would recommend that you make a mental plan that once you commit to your housing, you immediately look for an airline ticket, because they will only get more expensive after that. So if you're looking to reduce your costs, that would be my recommendation. My other recommendation would be to budget for going out to, buy food at a restaurant. I know everyone, usually myself included, goes into the program thinking that they will, only stay in to save money, but that's not always how it happens. There are happy hours in DC that, even if you are not consuming alcohol, you might still be able to go to a restaurant happy hour to network with people, especially if you're under 21. In addition to maybe you just want to go grab brunch with your cohort mates and things like that. So I would budget some money to still go out to eat, because it will be hard not to. So just something as well to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is this list of expenses that sometimes you don't think of until you get there. And this is mostly coming from my own experience, as well as the experience of the students that I work with when they come back from DC. So an important note is that your actual, sheets, blankets, pillows are not provided at the UC Center. You will need to ship your own. So they are twin extra long beds, same as college. So if you still have your old dorm bedding that you've been hanging on to, or you currently have a twin bed, it will probably be cheaper just to ship everything off. But if you were to need to buy new bedding, I would recommend you just buy it there, and there's a Target nearby. But that might be $50 that you might not have really thought of until you're there. So just as a heads up. The other thing to think about as well is that at the UC Center, there is a full kitchen with all basic kitchenware provided, but they are not the best quality. So if you are someone who likes to cook a lot and you are intending to eat in often, as that's what I did, you might want to think of, some things that will just make your stay a little bit more comfortable. So maybe sharper knives. I bought a chef's knife off of Amazon for like $30 because the one we had was pretty dull. Maybe special cookware if there's a particular item that you use a lot. Scissors was one that I did not know was not provided when I got there. So you can imagine me after my Target run with all these, small packages wrapped in plastic, and we did not have any scissors. So I had to go buy that last minute. Another thing that you are not provided that you will probably want if you are bringing your own lunch to work is Tupperware, which isn't that expensive. But again, these are all little things that can add up once you get there. Another thing is seasonal clothes. I had lived in San Diego for roughly 6-7 years when I went off to DC, and I did not quite understand how underprepared I was for the winter weather. So I remember running into an H&M and dropping a good $30 on another pair of gloves and a hat and a scarf. I already had a pair, but it was so cold I needed a thicker pair. So that's just something to keep in mind. I also remember that I needed to buy a heavy winter coat, like a puffer jacket, because nothing that I had at the time, from living in San Diego, fit the bill. So, and then of course, the other thing as well is work clothes. And this of course will vary depending on where your internship is. Certain congressional offices and other offices in DC might have a very strict dress code. For example, the office of Senator Dianne Feinstein has a very strict dress code for all interns. So I remember talking with some of her interns at the center, and they mentioned to me that they had to buy a lot of pieces to fit that dress code versus maybe nonprofits and other places. Where I was at the Wilson Center, we were very business casual. So you could wear jeans to work so long as they, were nice jeans and they were not, they were work appropriate kind of thing. So that'll depend, but it's again something to keep in mind. a good rule of thumb is that you probably should have at least like a blazer and some kind of slacks for networking and work events. So moving on to financial aid, and this part is really important. If you currently have financial aid at UCSD, it follows you to the UCDC Center. So I actually had a bit of tuition fee coverage, and part of why I did the UCDC program is because I knew that I would get that same benefit doing the program. So, you know, of that over $5,000 UCSD fee, I had much of that wiped out, and it made the UCDC program much more affordable. So if you are currently receiving financial aid and you're interested in applying to the DC program, I highly recommend you go meet with the financial aid office to discuss your current award and how that might be adjusted if you were to do the DC program, because DC has a higher cost of living, higher living expenses. So you might actually get a little bit more financial aid to help you cover that. Now, something important to note is that on the previous couple of slides, I've been talking about the academic year, so the fall, winter, and spring programs. Summer is a bit different. Summer does not have a required academic component, and that's why we do not consider it part of the, academic quarters. It is entirely optional to receive units. So for that reason, it is really important, if you're interested in summer, to go talk to the financial aid office, because you might need to be enrolled in at least 6 units in order to receive financial aid coverage while in DC. And so if that's the case, you would want to receive credit for completing an internship. And also, again, when you're at the center over the summer, you do not need to take a class for any units. So you could absolutely just receive the bare minimum 6 units for completing an internship. That's no problem. You just need to, think about that and know that before you go. Okay, so again, this $12,000 and $50 is the total estimated budget without any kind of financial aid, without scholarships, without extra resources. And again, this number has stayed pretty consistent for the last 2 years. I'm not sure, for the future, how much it would go up. It's mostly dependent on how the UCSD registration fees and the UCDC housing numbers go up. But we're going to be kind of, thinking about this number as we go through this presentation. If this is the number you're spending for a quarter in DC, how can you help bring that down? So with that in mind, we're next going to move into the idea of a paid versus an unpaid internship, because one might be more beneficial to you than the other, depending on your circumstance. And so for this part, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful guest speaker, Melissa. So Melissa is a UCDC alumni and also a former Capitol Hill staffer. And I'll give her the opportunity to talk more about her experience. She is also the founder of the Congressional App Challenge and TourTracker.com. And as I said, during the pandemic, she started her own YouTube channel on personal financing for congressional staff, and has also made a couple of videos for interns. So I'm really grateful to have her here today. And so Melissa, the floor is yours, and just go ahead and let me know slide when you're ready for the next one.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction. Forgot to unmute myself for a second. Thanks everyone for joining this afternoon. I appreciate your time, and happy to, again, at the end, answer any questions you have that we may not have covered. And I'm happy to talk about anything from internships in Washington, DC, my time as a UCDC student, and then also anything you may have about like personal finance, especially given how much it could possibly cost to work for free if that's the case. Next slide. So as Mackenzie had mentioned, I had started a YouTube channel that's initially was based on helping provide personal finance tips for congressional staff, because as many of you guys know, working in public service or working in DC tends to be a very low paying job if you get paid. And a number of times people struggle to make ends meet, or if you're an intern, you're trying to figure out, how do I now have to go in and work for free and also cover tuition? And so highly suggest you guys can check it out. And I think that they'll go ahead and they'll circulate this link for you guys to watch the various videos that I've created on how to get paid as an intern in DC, because that's the ideal. Go ahead and next slide. And so paid internships, right? Like the big thing I want to harp on is know your worth. Because a number of times back when I was an intern, they were not really offering paid internships, but times have changed since 2011 when I had graduated from college. And that's also the year that I did my UCDC program, was spring 2011. And at the time, very similar to Mackenzie, I had to take out student loans to work for free on Capitol Hill. And I also had to pay for my own metro, which at the end of the day, you know, cost probably $5 a day round trip to go back and forth from the UCDC Center. And these are things that you definitely want to budget for, because if you are paying your way through, these things add up. And the pros of taking a paid internship, obviously you get financial assistance to help subsidize your cost of living out in DC, which is quite expensive. And I grew up in Southern California. I was used to being able to like get a good meal for under $10. That's not necessarily the case in DC unless you're eating during a happy hour meal or you know, cook for yourself. Also, the pros of a paid internship is typically because the organization is paying you, they have very clear-cut roles and expectations that you're going to be expected to fulfill. Some of the cons obviously are you don't get paid, and then you have to figure out how now to start looking at other options if you don't get paid. But in terms of cons of paid internships, it may not still be enough money, right? I remember some friends, they got a stipend of $1,000 for the 4 months that they were out there. But if you calculate that, let's say that's $250 a month, and then you divide it by the amount of hours they were working a week, that's still not enough money to cover what you should be paid for the labor that you're doing. So just keep that in mind. Next slide. You may find that if you are applying to a number of agencies or nonprofits and a couple congressional offices, that there are unpaid internships. And, you know, the pros of taking internships, any internships in general, are the networking. I mean, DC is the nexus of where a number of people from a diverse set of backgrounds comes from. And that, I would say, some of the friends I made back 10 years ago when I did UCDC in 2011, we just did a Zoom call, and we're all in different parts of the US now. One's in North Carolina, another one's in Southern California, another one's in the Bay. We're all in different industries. We deviated from politics after our time in DC. And that's just something to keep in mind, that you start to build these relationships and friendships that will last. And also, eventually you get to know someone who maybe was an intern at the time you are, and now they're the next chief of staff to a member of Congress or working in the White House. So keep that in mind in terms of if you do take an unpaid internship, that there are benefits like networking and building out your relationships with others. Note that obviously during the unpaid internship, you want to take initiative and build out job skills that you eventually will put on your resume and leverage that for your next role. And so just keep that in mind. A number of times, like on Capitol Hill, interns are tasked with the basics of answer the phone or sort the mail. But I really encourage interns to take initiative. And when you're done with that, don't just sit there and like scroll through the internet. Ask a staffer or ask, you know, your intern coordinator, what else can I do? Is there a briefing you can send me to, and I'll take notes for you if you're interested in policy? Or like, can I draft an op-ed for the organization if you're interested in press? And so these are things that I really consider a good training for. So even if you are in an unpaid internship, you can start building these skill sets that you can leverage for your next position. Obviously, cons with being unpaid is you are now going to be the one who's going to take control of trying to figure out how you're going to fund your quarter out there in DC. And so you really want to consider what those options look like. The good news that we're going to get to soon is even if the internship itself doesn't pay you, there are organizations and scholarships that you should pursue to subsidize the cost of your quarter out there. And so we'll get to that next. And then lastly, just know with unpaid internships, because sometimes if the organization or office is not paying you, they may not have very clear-cut expectations of like what you should accomplish by the end of your 12 weeks there. So you just want to keep that in mind, that when you first start, you want to set a defined goal of what it is they expect you to do outside of some of the administrative tasks. And then make sure at the end you have like an exit meeting with your intern coordinator to, go over your accomplishments. And also this is a building process where if you need a letter of recommendation later, you can possibly get very good recommendations from this internship in DC. Next slide. So how to find paid internships. Obviously there are like Glassdoor, Indeed, USA Jobs, LinkedIn is helpful. DC specific, there are sometimes very specific websites like the Tom Manito's website and Brad Travers, where these are the ones where the DC individuals who are in the know use. Just note that it does, I think, have like a $5 paywall a month if you are looking for internships there. The other thing I would say that is free is if you are interested on working, for instance, on Capitol Hill, is to sign up for the House or the Senate bulletin. And after this, I'll send you guys a link of where I can send you all of the resources that I've compiled and created. And the House just sent out their call for intern openings that are coming up in the summer. And if you're interested, I can forward that list to you since you may have missed this week's. But there are options, free and also paid, that you can access this information. The best thing I would say is if you are looking at least for something on Capitol Hill, go to your specific member of Congress's website, because they may have more information and more updated ones on the internships that they offer. And they typically say like whether it's paid or unpaid on there because they're going to advertise. So that's just something to keep in mind. You can look at conventional places just searching online, but DC specific, if you're in the know, check out the Senate bulletin, the House bulletin for Congress in specific. If you're trying to work in an agency like the State Department, then you want to target their website specific. If you're going for think tanks or nonprofits, you want to look on their specific website as well, especially if you know who already you want to work for. And then otherwise, some DC specific ones, but they do have a paywall, which is a bit annoying, is the Tom Manitos and Brad Travers websites that you can check out. And usually too, that's where I know where interns who are looking for jobs and they want to leverage going to DC and eventually getting a job and staying out there, they tend to use Tom Manitos and Brad Travers, and they've been an institution. So those are the ones that people use who are in the know in DC. Next slide. Here's an example of what the House of Representatives puts out. And I added this slide because I wanted to show you, you can see here, for instance, Congressman Jeff Van Drew of New Jersey posts that, hey, this is the internship that we have open and it is paid. So again, I do want to let you guys know that whenever it is paid, most offices tend to highlight that so that they can attract the best talent. And as many of you guys know too, for the people who want to work on Capitol Hill, the ideal is you start with your local member of Congress, assuming you want to work for them and have the same political affiliation as them. If not, think about your senator. If not, think about members of Congress in the state, at least that you live in. And those would be where I would start, because I made the mistake where I really admired a senator who wasn't from California. And I had applied to her back when I was applying to internships. And I applied, by the way, to like 12 internships. Know that these are highly competitive. And so you really want to diversify the amount of internships that you do apply for, because you never know which one is actually going to work. And the senator that I had applied for, who wasn't representing the state of California, I ended up being rejected because of the fact I wasn't from her state. So just keep that in mind, that a number of times too, like a connection to that office or a connection to the organization that you're applying to may help. So if you do know anybody in DC who can connect you via email and electronically introduce you, I highly suggest that, because DC is a very like who you know kind of city, and you want to leverage any connections you may have. That isn't to say that if you don't have any connections, you're out of luck, because I didn't when I first applied, but that's why I applied to 12 different ones and tried to just diversify the applications that I had sent in. Next slide. So I do want to say in Congress, back in 2017, 90% of offices did not pay. That's changed since, because the House of Representatives in 2019 passed a new resolution that actually stipulates a separate fund for offices to use to pay interns. Even though there is an internship fund on the House side of Congress, not all members pay. So just keep that in mind when you are searching, because if you do want to work in Congress, make sure you ask. If being paid is important to you, just ask them during your interview, hey, is this congressional internship paid and how much? And then on the Senate side, the Senate, each office in the senators' offices decides whether or not they pay their interns and by how much. Keep in mind that each payment could be a stipend, it could be hourly, or it could be need-based, which has been a new development that different offices and different organizations use. So make sure to ask if finances are important to you and you do want to get paid, because you want to know what opportunities you have. And then separately, what we're going to get into is, if it isn't paid, get resourceful, because if your dream internship doesn't pay and there's no way that they're going to be able to find the budget to cover your costs, I'm going to get into this next, are the organizations that will help fund interns that take unpaid internships. Next slide. Cool. And I'll hand it back to you, because then we'll bounce off of each other.
Absolutely. So really quickly, the first, thing that you can do when you're planning your DC quarter is to immediately apply for some of the scholarships and fellowships available to UC students. The UC system and UCSD has actually done a pretty good job in recent years of kind of beefing up their funding opportunities for students doing internships. So these are the main ones that we usually advertise for the UCDC program that you would normally apply to about the same time that you are applying to go to that UCDC quarter. So the first one is the UC Office of the President Presidential Fellowship. I believe it's actually specifically called the Public Policy or Public Service Presidential Fellowship. So this one is normally offered during the fall, winter, and spring quarters. It is kind of on a uncertain basis though. So during the pandemic, they had actually stopped this fellowship until this next coming quarter. So now they will be offering this, currently doing this workshop right now, winter quarter. They announced that they would be offering this fellowship during spring, which is great. So I'm very hopeful that this will once again be a recurring scholarship opportunity. But it's usually a stipend of about $1,500 per month or per quarter, depending on how much money they have. So $1,500 isn't a ton, but it is something. So that's something to keep in mind. The other one is the Academic Internship Program scholarships. And so this one is also kind of a uncertain, need to see how much money is in the fund before they officially announce that students can apply for it. But again, it's a $1,500 stipend to students based on financial need and overall academic performance. It's usually available on a rolling basis as long as they have the funds. And we usually post both of these opportunities on the UCDC and AIP websites. So that would be the first thing to check for. And I definitely recommend that if you have the financial need, that you automatically put in an application for these. For any political science majors, there are often scholarships available from the generous donations of UCSD alumni and friends of alumni. in order to help bring down the costs of a quarter in DC. But these scholarships vary in how much are given out. It also might vary how much is available from quarter to quarter. So this is something that I would recommend, making an appointment with an advisor like Natalie with the political science department, and just letting them know that you are applying to UCDC and you are interested in receiving a scholarship, and they will be able to direct you to where to apply and, maybe how much you can get out of these. And so on here are the links for all of this. And so there's the undergraduate scholarship for AIP. So this is up to 1,000. It might actually be up to 1,500 now. It's something to go ahead and check on. And then if you are a STEM major who is interested in working in DC, specifically on the policy side of things, and there are lots of opportunities for that. I'm a former bio major, so something I did while I was in DC was actually ask around about science policy, because I didn't know that was an option when I was a biology major. And so there's actually a program through UCSD called SPIP, Science Policy Internship Program, where it provides up to $1,500 for STEM majors completing a policy internship, which includes being like a congressional intern and things like that, which is awesome. A bigger and more competitive scholarship, and it's run through the UCDC Center. So it's not a UCSD scholarship. It's actually available to all of the UCDC participants, is the Matsui Fellowship. And so this is up to 2,500. So it's more, it's a larger fellowship. All majors can apply for this. The only catch is that you would need to be completing some kind of public service or congressional internship. But here's the thing about DC. Most of the work that organizations do is related back to public service. So the only ones that I can think of off the top of my head that wouldn't fulfill this would be like a profit-driven business internship that is not working for the public good. But even something like a private business that's doing public consulting or working with governments, that could even be considered public service. So just keep that in mind when you're applying to the UC Office of the President and the Matsui Fellowships. And so again, UC Presidential Public Service. I'm sorry that I put 1,000 on here. I do believe that's incorrect. I do believe it's 1,500 for both the AIP and the UC Presidential Public Service Fellowship. And then the other one that is not very well advertised, except for on the UCDC website in very small print, is there is actually a Stephanie R. Sides scholarship that is up to $1,000 for any students interested in social justice or international diplomacy. So, one thing to note is that these scholarships, are a bit small. So, only 1,000, 1,500, maybe up to 2,500, for a full quarter in DC, that, as we said before, is about 12,000. So it's not to say to not apply for these, but just keep in mind that it is only going to take a small chunk off of the total bill, and that some of the resources that Melissa is about to provide to you might be very effective to either combine with these scholarships, or to kind of think about, how to actually finance the difference. And that's going to be up to all of you, is deciding, what are your personal finances, and how much are you personally going to be financing for that big $12,000 bill. So I'm going to pass it back over to Melissa to tell us about all the other opportunities.
Great. So one thing I wanted to say was, looking back now, I wish some of these organizations that I'm about to share with you existed and were doing the things that they're doing now. For instance, College to Congress is one where they help students who are Pell Grant eligible basically have a fully covered semester or summer in DC. And they'll pay for everything, like round trip flight, your housing and boarding, the metro stipend, and I think Lyft also sponsors them, where they can cover the interns getting around DC for that time period that they're there for their internship. So I highly suggest also looking to complement the scholarships you're looking at with these organizations that can cover your possibly full semester. The other So that's College to Congress. They are focused mainly on students who are Pell Grant eligible, or students who will submit a statement stating why their current, financial status, they need help financially to cover that, whatever that is. So you may want to check out College to Congress. There's also the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. There's a number of these organizations based on your heritage that will also support you going to DC to do an internship. So I highly suggest you also look at other organizations based on your heritage, because sometimes they'll provide you, like with APACS, I think it's like $2,500 stipend. So again, if you are building your list of scholarships that you can possibly receive, in addition to complimentary stipends and be a part of these organizations, it's a great way to hit that $12,000 mark and hopefully not take out any loans. Because in all honesty, I mean, it took me a year and a half to pay all that money back, and the interest that you pay on it is not ideal. So any money you can get now that you can just apply to, take, an hour for the application, I highly suggest it. And some of these organizations, they're not as widely known, and so you have a very good shot of applying for them. Next slide. There's also the HBCU caucus, where this is actually interesting. They do a bipartisan internship where the individuals who get accepted into that program, who will get their internship covered, will also do half of their time in like a Democrat office and then half of their time in a Republican office, because it is like a bipartisan experience that this organization wants the individuals to take away from for that, so for that quarter or that time period. So you may want to look into that. There's also the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute. They do it where it's actually half public sector and half private sector. So what's interesting about DC, right, is like, yes, public sector is a large portion of that industry, if you will, where you can do public service, work for Congress, work for an agency, but there's also internships with like lobbying firms or trade organizations or nonprofit organizations that you can explore. So these are things where you'd want to consider as you are looking for internships moving forward, what particular, sector you want to target. And it may be interesting for you to explore something you may not have considered before or didn't realize that, like, the Facebook internship program is one, I believe, that pays, and you can look into them if you want to go more private but government relations, or you can go, and apply for like a presidential internship and working in the White House. So it depends on you. Next slide. And for more external organizations, so I have compiled a list. I highly suggest you to go ahead and check out the How to Find a Paid Internship video. I go over more organizations there, and then also can send you, if you guys sign up, I think there's a link to the form to be like, yes, I would also like the full like Excel of all of the organizations that you know of out in DC. I'm happy to send that to you. And it combines a lot. Like, there are some organizations too that will provide stipends for individuals in the LGBTQ community. I believe there's one where there is an organization that also provides a stipend for individuals who come from a disabled background. So again, there's this wide variety and diversity of support out there that I highly suggest, if you fall into any of those categories, you consider, because it's, again, money that can help provide and support you while you're in DC. And then, as you can see here, in addition to the How to Find a Paid Internship video, I've also created a number of other videos of how to consider, like, how do you live in DC on a budget? And I think Mackenzie had mentioned this, right? Like, obviously, when your friends are going out, you don't want to miss out on that. And even if you're not 21, there are a number of places that do have happy hours where you can get food there. And that's also an affordable way to eat dinners after work. Obviously, right now, because it's COVID, if you are applying into, DC internships now or within the next 6 months, they probably don't have the receptions that typically DC is known for, especially on Capitol Hill. But I would also say that that's another cost-effective way that when I was an intern would attend these events that are going on. There's probably like 10 or 15 a night just on Capitol Hill that you can go to, and it helped complement me not needing to cook at home, and then I could eat sliders or bacon wrapped scallops for dinner, and then also have like a veggie platter. So these are things to consider. Obviously during COVID, it's a different time period. There are no receptions going on, but as things eventually start to reopen, and if somebody's watching this video later on in the future when things are open and receptions are back, that's something to consider. Next slide. And I think we'll get into the question section once we're wrapping up, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Again, whether that's, internship in DC, how to apply to it, how to successfully lock in that internship, all the way to how do you finance it. And because of my background, I had started off as an intern on Capitol Hill. I initially was a political science and business major and figured, oh, my last semester in DC might as well, or my last semester in college might as well do an internship because I'll probably go into the business sector, and public sector obviously pays lower. So it's best to do my internship now. Long story short, one semester turned into nearly 5 years in Washington, DC, where I ended up getting a job offer during my internship to stay with the member of Congress that I had been working for, worked for him for initially 2 years, and then he got chairman of Foreign Affairs Committee. So then I got offered a job to stay and travel the world for another 2. And then eventually I left to go to business school. And in the interim time during business school, I had also launched a nonprofit, which was the Congressional App Challenge. So I'm sharing this with you because I want to let you know, just because you're going to start off maybe in public service, that there is this way of which in DC, there's private sector, there's nonprofit, there's a way in which you can work in public service too. So there are many options and you're not limited. And you're also, just because you start in one, doesn't mean you can't pivot to another. Because currently I started a civic tech startup, Tour Tracker, after business school. And that's what I'm currently doing now, in addition to producing some fun videos on the side, because what else are we doing in quarantine? So happy to answer any questions you may have just about DC, about how to finance, and I'll turn it back to Mackenzie for any closing remarks before we open it up for question and answer.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So just as a quick reminder for anyone who wants to start searching for internships, and just to throw in one more resource that's just currently on our website. You can actually go to our UCDC at UCSD website, and then go to internship resources, and then go to past internships, and you can actually look up places where UCDC, specifically UCSD, UCDC students have worked at before. And this might be helpful to you because if you are applying to an organization that you really want to work for because they pay their interns, or because it's a really great opportunity, this is worth looking up so that you can say in a cover letter or in an email, I know that you have had a UCDC intern before. Additionally, this might just be helpful for you to start thinking about potential organizations and looking them up by name, maybe looking up if they have any paid opportunities, or just seeing what opportunities they do offer. So I just wanted to, leave you all with kind of one more resource as a reminder. Okay, and so for the students currently attending, and for any students who are, watching this video within this winter quarter and next spring quarter, these are our upcoming UCDC deadlines. And actually, these do not have the updated dates, I realize now, because we are definitely recruiting for 2022. But I will just let you know that for anyone interested in next fall quarter, that internship, or excuse me, that deadline is going to be at the start of spring quarter. So if you're interested in going to DC this coming fall 2021, go ahead and start thinking about perhaps meeting with the UCDC team And so this is how you can do that. Additionally, if you're interested in going to DC in winter 2022, again, that same deadline for the application will also be at the end of this coming spring quarter. So if you're interested in going to DC in either fall or winter, just know that those deadlines will be next quarter in spring. So that being said, if you're interested and you would like to know more about the UCDC program, if you'd like to chit chat more about internships and perhaps resources, this is how you can get in contact with us. So we do currently have drop-in advising hours on Tuesdays from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. Pacific time over Zoom. Additionally, you can meet with our program coordinator. So my boss, Jennifer Homrich, through this You Can Book Me link, which is a really nice way if you can't make drop-in hours just to set up an appointment, as well as you can meet with someone like me, UCDC peer advisor, through this link as well. If you're a political science major, you can connect with Natalie or the other advisors through the virtual advising center. And so with that, I hope the students who are here today have a couple questions for Melissa, since we're so lucky to have her. And at this time, feel free to unmute yourselves and ask the question. And then Melissa, if either you or I can repeat the student's question.
Yeah, Calvin, I see that you have your hand raised. Also, if you wanted to just put your question in the chat, if that's easier, happy to do that. I'll read the question from the chat box and then we can go from there. So first question is, Melissa, do you have any tips for applying to be a congressional intern? Good question, and a very popular one. So couple things. If you're applying to be a congressional intern, great. See, oh, 2 people already wanted to ask that question. So in terms of applying to be a congressional intern, where you'd want to start is with your local member of Congress. The reason why I say that is because your members of Congress care about their constituents, high priority with them. And so if your member of Congress is somebody who you're interested in working for, you'd want to apply for them. When you apply for them, you want to, in your cover letter, as a constituent living in the X district, I am so interested in working for my local member of Congress. Like, fit that in somewhere. It's very important because your cover letter will then be at the top of the pile. Because at the end of the day, if there are equal individuals with equal skills and one is a constituent and one is out of the district, you're probably going to be favored. I can't say that that's always 100% the case, but as a former internship coordinator myself, we highly favored individuals who came from the district, especially because the member of Congress serves that area. If you're thinking about applying to a member of Congress, and let's say it's not your member, right? Either you have a difference of political affiliation and you want to work for somebody else, you can still apply to them. What I would say is think about timing. So what people don't realize is the summer, and again, COVID is a bit different in that right now there's a lot of potential for virtual internships, but in a normal time, and let's say things start to reopen, they start to have interns in person, the high impacted times are typically the summer, where for 3 spots, each office is probably getting a couple hundred resumes. What people don't realize is coming in the spring and then secondary the fall, there is a huge drop off. I've had a number of offices when I was an intern coordinator basically email me from another state being like, do you guys have any extra intern applications of someone who'd want to work? Because there is a dearth of potentials who come during the spring and then the winter. Or I guess, yeah, spring, winter, and then even like fall quarters. So these are things to think about of timing of when you apply. For you guys, I think it's the winter quarter that would be like the least competitive, meaning that there's less interns applying for that time. And then the most popular is the summer. And then the fall is like right in the middle over there. So I would say ideally with Congress, you want to go with your member of Congress. And if it's not your member of Congress, find ties. So I remember the office I ended up working with, my cousins were constituents in that member of Congress's district. And I mean, I would spend my time in Orange County a lot anyway. And I made sure to mention, like, my family are constituents of your district, would love to work for my member, or like a member of Congress who represents, my loved ones, or whatever it is you want to say. Obviously, you want to word that a little bit more professional, but I would definitely emphasize that anywhere you can find a tie to that office, highly suggest it. And then secondary, timing. If you aren't going to be going in the summer when it's highly competitive, consider the winter quarter when you're probably competing against maybe like 20 other individuals. And if you time it right, you can get that congressional internship. Hopefully that was helpful. Okay, next question. When will UCDC be back in person? I'm going to pass that to Mackenzie, as she will probably know better.
Yeah, that's a great question. Currently, I hate to say that I don't know, and we're waiting for updates, but that is the current situation. The UCDC Center, or UC Center Washington rather, their advising committee is currently deliberating the fate of fall. They had just come out with the decision about summer about 2 weeks ago, and their decision was to keep summer remote for right now. So I recommend that you're more than welcome, as the quarter goes on, to email us, ucdc@ucsd.edu, for an update. Additionally, you can look up on the UC Center Washington's website. They post coronavirus updates as well. So I'm so sorry that I don't have a better answer for you. They actually let us know that they would likely have an answer about fall in early March. So go ahead and keep on checking. And I see a question for Melissa in the chat.
Great. So the next question is, how were you able to advance from an internship to a full-time position? And this is a very good question too, because a number of times you have a number of interns who are on Capitol Hill looking for jobs, and it's a highly competitive. The thing I would say is, for me, I leveraged my last semester in college to then be out there at the time that if I did a good job and there was an opening, they could offer me the job, and then I'd just stay in DC. And then that was a seamless transition. I will say, because internships are highly competitive and there are multiple interns typically for one office who are also looking for jobs, you want to stand out and you want to take initiative. So like I mentioned before, if you're an intern, they will be giving you admin work as the base. And that's basically a check to be like, can you handle the basics? And as you build trust with your intern coordinator and the staffers in the organization that you work for, whether that's a member of Congress office, whether that's a nonprofit organization, whether it's a private entity, they will give you more responsibilities, and more responsibilities is a sign that they trust you. And take initiative. So when you find yourself, okay, you're done answering the phone calls, you've already sorted the mail or whatever admin work they have you do, ask, what can I do next? How can I help? But you also want to be smart in that if you want to turn it into a job that you're going to want, if, let's say I'm interested in policy, you want to ask, is there a briefing I can go to on foreign affairs that I can take notes and bring back to you and write a one-pager? Or if you're interested in media and press secretary roles, then you may want to say, hey, can I volunteer to draft an op-ed for your boss that can possibly be put to publication? And you're going to take the initiative to do that and submit it into them. So these are things to consider, where if you want to really leverage and get a job out of your internship, or be top of mind, so that when you graduate, they'll be like, oh, I really enjoyed working with so-and-so. This staff assistant job is opening up. Let's go ahead and give them a call. I've seen that happen in a number of offices where the intern may have come in fall or the summer prior. And when finally that job opened up, they were at top of the minds for the chiefs of staff and the directors of those organizations. And I'd also say, if, let's say you're not coming in the spring quarter or the winter quarter where it's closer to when you're graduating and you still have to go back to school, stay in touch with your internship coordinator, and or if you built a relationship with the chief of staff or the director of that organization, quarterly, just send them a note. Be like, hey, how is it going? Here's an update on my life. Like if you're about to graduate and you did an internship last summer, or let's say this summer or this fall, and then you graduate a year from now, essentially, you would then want to maybe shoot them an update next January to be like, hey, I'm on track to graduating in March or May or June or whenever your graduation date is. I'm definitely interested in going back to Washington, D.C. Do you know of any potential openings, or do you have time for a quick 15 to 20-minute call so I can update you on what I'm interested in? And if you hear of anything, to let me know. These like informational interviews are critical in finding out what positions are open when you're searching for them. And again, I mentioned this before, DC is such an in the know city that being top of mind to people and sending them your resume when you are starting to look is going to be very important. So to answer that question, long story short, you want to take initiative as an intern, make sure you are memorable. And then separately, if you aren't graduating at the time that your internship is ending, then you want to make sure you continuously contact your intern coordinator or the chief of staff at that office or the director of the organization, because you want to be top of mind when it comes to them having an opening and thinking about who they want to hire. And then
Awesome.
Mackenzie.
I think this last one's for me. Yep. So the student's question is, can I talk a little bit about my experience at the Wilson Center and possibly give some tips on how to get internship positions there and at other think tanks? So that's a great question. Right off the bat, I just want to explain that there is a divide in internships available at think tanks. So on one hand, you have the research internships to support all of the awesome research that these think tanks are known for doing. And for anyone who is a bit confused on what a think tank is, it is a large research institution that can be either publicly funded or privately funded, or a mixture of the two, as Wilson is. And their primary purpose is to be putting out research, perhaps to influence congressional decision making, perhaps influence policy. That would be in their mission statement, but that's kind of the gist of what it does. So at these think tanks, there are, the research interns, and then the other side is the administrative and external relations interns. And so they have vastly different duties. And they aren't necessarily mutually exclusive from each other. So just because you're a research intern doesn't mean that you can't help participate in event planning and things like that. And vice versa, just because you're an administrative intern doesn't mean that you can't go chit chat with researchers and maybe even ask if you can hop onto a project. However, in the application process, they usually have very different applications. In particular, this was my experience at the Wilson Center. I was interested initially in being a research intern. However, I was a little bit late to the game in applying as I was applying for winter. And so I was actually almost already through fall quarter, like halfway through fall quarter when I was applying to Wilson. And I saw that at Wilson, to be a research intern, the application consisted of 5 references, which is a lot. I think letters of reference more specifically, which that takes a while to ask 5 different people to write a letter on your behalf. So that I did not think was going to happen. Additionally, they were asking for a number of writing samples, which at the time I had just switched over from being a biology major, and I did not feel I had enough writing material as a political science major to submit. Now, I definitely could have come up with these materials had I had a little bit more time, but at the time I just scrapped that. I was like, I will not be applying to be a research intern, but that would have been a really cool opportunity, which is why I say, planning is so important when it comes to DC. If you want to maximize your experience, financial planning and planning ahead for internships really makes the time leading up to going to DC so much less stressful. So moving on. to be an administrative intern / external relations. So I was part of the external relations team as a media intern. And so I worked with my boss on all things media relations. So that was speaking with the press, that was, coordinating with the events being put on to make sure the press was there, that we would have quotes to post on the website, quotes to give journalists that would be posted in other places, like anywhere from, the Diplomat to the Economist to the New York Times and Washington Post, which sounds like very illustrious and, wow, sparkle, sparkle, which was neat. That was kind of the fun of being the media intern, was the glitz and the glam of, what the job sounds like. But in reality, the job was a lot of the grunt work of pulling up press lists and creating media advisories saying, FYI, calling all journalists, the Wilson Center will be hosting this event related to this, worldwide event happening. That was what Wilson did, is we had all these regional experts who would conduct research and also speak at events or speak to each other or write op-eds about world events that were happening and kind of giving their take on it. So that was the fun of being the media intern, is you're at the nexus of all of that. However, I was separate from the research interns. The research interns had their own little computer lab on the base floor, and their job was just to complete their tasks, and they would just work with one other researcher, or maybe like a small team of researchers, but it was a very small pod. And so that's kind of why all the research interns got tucked together, versus as an administrative intern, I was working with a much larger team. So I had, the external relations team had practically its own floor at the Wilson Center. So that was what I really enjoyed. And so I just want all of you to know that, you don't have to do research to work at a think tank, but the duties are going to be a little bit different. And so some examples of think tanks besides the Wilson Center would be the Brookings Institute, the Center for International, CSIS, International for Center for International Strategic Studies. There it is. I just had to take a minute. In addition to, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, which is a really great one if you're interested in like social policy, impacting the lives. So just some tips for applying would be, if you want to be a research intern, think about the coursework that you've already taken. That's probably going to be most relevant. Think of any papers you've written that you've really enjoyed. Any topics that you've chosen that relate directly to, a specific program. Most think tanks have specific programs that are often regional focused, but sometimes might be more broad, like generally security, generally environmental, versus regional might be like Middle East, Europe, Russia, etc. Think about that. Get some of those papers ready. Make sure that you got at least an A- on a paper before you submit it as a writing sample. And also know that for writing samples, you might have a 20-page research paper, but they really only might want 3 pages. So something you can do is take 3 pages out of the middle, but write a very small introduction paragraph just stating what this paper was about, what your thesis was, etc. So that's my recommendation for that. Obviously, look ahead. Don't get goosed by going, oh no, 5 letters of rec and it's due next week. That's not going to happen. Don't be me. If you're an administrative intern though, since it's a less niche field, you have a lot of flexibility to apply to be a media intern at a host of different think tanks. The benefits of the admin intern is that if you just want to get a gist of what the think tank is doing and get some of those connections, use the tips that Melissa was just telling us about to try to launch yourself into a job, you can absolutely do that. On a personal note, while I was at Wilson, I got really interested in Arctic policy. And so now actually in graduate school, I am referencing Wilson's Polar Institute, which they do research on the Arctic. I am referencing them in a lot of my papers, and I'm actually planning very soon to send over some of those papers back to Wilson and say, oh, hello, do you remember me? Because I became friends with one of the people who worked there. And for me to say, if you ever have a job opening, I would love for you to contact me because I've been gaining some expertise in this field and I would really be interested in working for you once again. So that, to tie back to Melissa's previous answer, that's kind of how you can round about that. And I was talking for a while, so I apologize. One quick question I just saw: how far in advance should we apply to internships / how can we find internships that are far more obscure times like winter quarter? So I'll go first because I'm already talking, and I was a winter quarter student, or I went to DC in the winter is what I mean. So if you're applying for the summer, as Melissa already mentioned, early winter, January is going to be your time frame. You might see January deadlines for summer, February, and then probably at the latest March. So keep that in mind. If you're applying for fall internships, you should be starting to apply at the end of spring, beginning of summer, probably no later than end of June. Maybe like a July 1st deadline would be your kind of last call. And then for spring, it's a similar story. Your last call would probably be around Christmas time. And you should start applying at the beginning of fall, so maybe like September, October. So, and that's one of those things where if you want more guidance on that, I recommend coming in to talk to the UCDC team so that we can make sure you're kind of set up for success. One thing to note is that as soon as we accept you into the program for your UCDC program, we are accepting you about 2 quarters in advance of when you go. So you have ample time to, as soon as you get your acceptance, turn around and start throwing in applications. Additionally, you can accept an internship before you apply to UCDC. So that's something important to keep in mind. And then for those obscure, winter quarter internships, often they are labeled as spring. And so it's important that you make sure you're applying to internships with, flexible dates, or at the least, it does not say interns must start on February 2nd. Because in the winter, you are often going to DC your first or second week of January. In my case, I remember we started January 6th. So that's something where it's totally fine to apply to spring internships. And then either in your cover letter or in an email, say, well, actually, I'm a part of the UCDC program, and my school is a quarter system. So I will be in DC from, let's say, January 6th to March 23rd. May I still apply for this internship? Or just to say it in your cover letter and let them decide. So that's what I did when I was a winter. I knew I'd be in DC for the winter quarter. And so I was applying to all these spring internships. And I just said very clearly in the very beginning of my cover letter when I would be in DC. And most of the internships that I applied for, when they got back to me, they let me know that it wasn't a problem that I was a winter quarter student. But most of the ones that got back to me had actually said, I'm so sorry, we've actually already filled our quota. So again, apply in advance. Melissa, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, to build on that, I typically use like a 6-month rule that you can't start to plan too early. So even if you look 9 months before and then you see, okay, here's the open window. If you already know who you want to apply for, just go ahead and check their website right now. They typically have, like, if you look right now, it's February, they'll have summer and most likely fall deadlines listed on their websites. And then this also goes for the organizations that will possibly fund your experience out there in DC. You need to start at least 6 months early, knowing what those deadlines look like, because they come pretty early. Like for fall, they're starting to look at applications like now through early summer. So you just want to really consider that. If you are thinking fall, start to look now. I know that a number of members of Congress offices that are my clients for Tour Tracker are starting to interview candidates that they've already received resumes for summer internships starting now. And so that's something where, again, they have been accepting applications for the last 2 to 3 months, but they've set deadlines February, mid-Feb, latest early March to make a decision on who they're actually going to offer internships for. So just keep that in mind. And then the other thing I want to say, because there are really good questions here, that I'm going to be also producing more videos, for instance, like what internship questions you need to know if you're applying to DC internships and why they ask these questions, because they're not the typical ones that you normally get in like a private sector company. And so if you're interested in knowing more of this kind of information, researching about how to prepare yourself for internship interviews, highly suggest checking out the YouTube channel. That video is probably in the works in the next like week or two. So these are things that you can, if you subscribe to the channel, get updates on whenever I publish new content, because I think that it's helpful for you guys to know. When I first applied, and Mackenzie, you can probably talk to this too, a number of places would ask interesting questions that are more than just a typical, tell me about yourself, or like, describe a time when you experience a conflict, which are normal, and those are usually the base. But for instance, one of the internship interviews that I did, they asked me like, what news sources do you follow? But that was like a secret way, right, to know basically what your political affiliation is. So these are things you want to know when they're asking you these questions, what they're actually looking for and vetting. And I'm going to plan to do a video on that just to help, individuals who are going to be applying know more about the process and what to be prepared for, because there are a number of questions that you want to not be caught off guard, that you want, to have in a preparation doc. So that's just something else that I wanted to add. And then I think the next question is back to Mackenzie, which is about UCSD.
Perfect. And it looks like this might be our last one for the day. So this question is, do you have any policy class recommendations available at UCSD, especially anything related to public health? And so the short answer is, I really recommend you go to your major advisors or the public health department if they're not your major, if maybe that's a minor, just something you're interested in, and just letting them know that you're interested in potentially doing UCDC, potentially doing a policy related internship, and you'd like to prepare yourself by taking some kind of policy related class. And this is great for two reasons. One is you're already building a new connection with someone in the department who could maybe know someone in DC and maybe connect you to them and say, oh, you're interested in going to DC? Yeah, we don't get too many of those who let us know. Let me get you in contact with someone, which could be, one less step that you have to do. How awesome. The other reason it's great is because they're going to be able to give you a plethora of classes to consider. And what I would do for anyone in any major, and I really wish that I had the opportunity to do this when I was a, fresh political science major trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do at an internship. I really do wish I had more planning, which is why, I've been wanting to put on workshops like these to help you all plan for a quarter in DC. Thinking about, what types of internships am I already interested in? What kind of organizations, what kind of work that they do, these different areas of policy, these different areas of study. So what am I already interested in? And what am I interested in learning more about so that I can prepare myself to apply for this kind of internship? So if you're already thinking about public health, you might be thinking about, what organizations in DC kind of marry public health, public service with policy, or again, going back to the service idea, public service, which is basically you are just serving the community in some way. And so once you start making a list, maybe it's Doctors for America, maybe it's the American Medical Association, things like that, you can say, what should I learn more about to better prepare myself for an internship here? Either to make yourself a better applicant or also just to improve your own knowledge so that you can figure out if you really do want to go apply somewhere like that. Then you go back to that list of classes that you hopefully just got and you say, which of these would really help me accomplish that? And I very much wish that I had done that, because now as a graduate student, I feel like I am almost playing catch up, because now that's what I'm doing. Because like I said, I kind of did this in reverse while I was at Wilson. I said, oh, Arctic policy, how fun. It piqued my interest because it was this intersection of security and environmental and economic policy. And then I was like, well, it'd be fun to go to grad school to learn more about that, but if I had, played my cards a little bit better, I could have done all of that in undergrad. And so of course I went to graduate school because I wanted to learn lots of other things like building myself a policy toolkit and such. And that was, a very personal decision. But at the end of the day, I felt like I reverse engineered it. Versus for all of you, I'd like you all to think about doing it now as an undergraduate, thinking about what classes you can take that will pique your interest in a new area or help you learn more about something to prepare yourselves for an internship. So that would be my recommendation. Okay, and with that, thank you so very much for our guest speaker. I really thought this was an incredible workshop with so many rich resources, and I hope all the students watching this are able to, learn more about financing a quarter in DC and having a new, toolkit that they can use to think about how are they going to be able to reduce their stress while they're in DC.
And I just want to say thank you for having me. Thank you to the UCSD program for the UCDC Center for inviting me and really working towards empowering you guys as students to know what your options are. I think this is something where Mackenzie and I had first connected and we were like, man, we wish we knew this stuff before we went to DC where we had to take out loans. So really utilize this information. There's more resources out there now. And I, wish you guys luck as you're looking for your internships in DC. It's going to be a wonderful experience, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you again for inviting me. This was great.